Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Somebody was asking me could I sort of talk about the USG grinder and talk about RS chain, which is rapid super full chisel, and RM chain, which is semi chisel. So we'll talk about the different angles. Stihl is a little bit more aggressive in their angles than Oregon. So when I start talking angles, I'll try and make sure that I'm talking about a Stihl angle or an Oregon angle. But they're both the same angle, but just for those people that are not too familiar with a Stihl grinder, Stihl use 0 degrees reference point right at the top. So when I angle this grinder vertical, that is referred to at 0 degrees at the top, and it turns left. On a Oregon grinder, it's 90 degrees at the top and it turns to the right. So if we say 60 degrees on an Oregon, that means it'll move from 90 to 60, which means it's only moved 30 degrees. When we talk a Stihl grinder, we start off at 0 at the top and we move over to 30, which means it's moved 30 degrees to the left. So the Oregon moves to the right, the Stihl moves to the left. Oregon used 90 degrees as vertical reference point and Stihl used 0 degrees reference point. So during the course of the video, I'll try to, if I say an angle, I'll say Stihl grinder. If I say Oregon, so I'll make sure I mention that because there's nothing worse confusing. Now, when I'm talking about those angles, I'm talking about this scale here. This is referred to the A scale, and it goes from minus 15 degrees to positive 50 degrees. The B scale, and we'll just see whether you can see that, is the movable vise. And if we zoom in there, you can see that it goes from minus 40, 0 in the middle, to positive 40. So it's actually not in degrees, it's in millimeters. So that's an 80 millimeter scale from minus 40 to positive 40. Then we've got your typical scale here. So this is the top plate scale. This is the C scale here, and it goes from 0 to 60 degrees to this side and 0 to 60 degrees this side. This scale here is referred to when we're using a chainsaw as top plate cutting angle because it's the beveled angle. It's right on the edge of the tooth. So when we adjust this, this is your 30-degree angle. It's right on the tooth. It's not the beveled angle. So just so that you don't get confused, and a lot of people get confused with the different scales, and the top plate, that's the top plate there. The top plate cutting angle is that beveled angle that you can see there. So you've got two angles. That's referred to as a compound beveled angle. So what we'll talk about, and we'll put a picture up there in the left-hand corner as we rattle off the chains, we'll talk about some of the Stihl chains, and just zoom back out there, some of the Stihl chains and the angles used for them. So first of all, we'll talk about the full chisel and the semi-chisel, and I've got a few others there. I've got Hexagonal X-cut. That's an interesting one. And I've got the Stihl's Hexa, so that's another different one as well. So we'll go over those, and we'll talk about the angles, and we'll talk about the grinding wheels and the dressing of it. When you get a Stihl grinder, you'll notice this is the card or the template for the wheels. And it's a little bit different than the full circle. I only worry about one side because it's the inside that matches. But you can dress the wheel. You don't have to dress it like that. You can just dress the wheel how you would dress a normal grinder with like the half a circle. They've only got this shape on one side because we're only dealing with one side. We don't grind on that side. We only grind on this side on a USG grinder. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the setup here, how to make sure that your grinding wheel is in dead line with the little guide rails where you put your chain. I've got it offset about 1.5 millimeters. This scale on the side, the B scale, is not in degrees, it's in millimeters. It's -40 to +40, so that's 80 millimeters in width. I'll show that to you in a minute. So when you pull this down, have it in the grinding position. So that's the position that you grind your teeth at. Need to have a good steel ruler. Don't get a real thin one. Make sure it's reasonable thickness, at least 1.5 millimeters, something like that, and it's good quality and nice and straight. Don't ever try and do this with a bent ruler. Now when you pull this down, and we'll zoom in there, you'll notice that in the up position, you'll notice that, have a look at that, how off center it is. So as you lower the wheel, the middle of the shaft goes towards the ruler, and then it crosses to the opposite side of the ruler. But we're not at a dead horizontal angle, and as I get horizontal, it starts to creep. As soon as I pass horizontal, it starts to go back the other way, and it keeps going back the other way. So that now is in its position. That is the position there where it's in the dead center. Pretty easy to see, but as you can see, as you move up, it changes height. It moves out of position. So I'm moving up over 10 millimeters, but it only moves a little bit. So I'll just show you, if I take the camera off, and we can sort of zoom in and just show you on the scale. So the scale is in millimeters, 80 millimeters, and we've got about 1.5 millimeters to the positive side. So that's pretty simple and straightforward on how to set up your alignment to make sure it's in the middle. Now, while I'm onto the vise, let me say that if you were to read the Stihl manual and you were to read the Stihl USG chart, you will not find any reference to Stihl chains that recommend the 10 degrees downward tilt. The 10 degrees downward tilt is no longer recommended by Stihl. It used to be, but it no longer is. I think it goes back to the days when people were hand filing, and what they found out was happening then was that they were getting a parrot's beak on some of the teeth. So the whole idea was that if you drop your file down 10 degrees, that would eliminate the parrot's beak on the end of the tooth. And if you look at the Stihl USG chart where it's got B, there is no reference to using 10 degrees downward tilt. Now, I do remember back in the days of the 066, which is about 1994, Stihl were recommending to use 10 degrees downward tilt, but then I think in the late 90s it all changed and they no longer recommended it. I've actually tried it and I find that it's not making any difference on the new Stihl chain, so I no longer use 10 degrees downward tilt. So on the Stihl RS chains, which I'll be talking about in a minute, there is no reference to 10 degrees downward tilt. There's no 10 degrees downward tilt on Hexa. Stihl, just don't use it, full stop. So yeah, that's the way it is. So just before we get into it, when we talk about the top plate cutting angle, that is the A scale. When we're talking about moving the vise, that's the B scale. And when we talk about adjusting the top plate angle, that is the C scale. A, B, and C. Pretty easy to remember. So we're going to show 4 different chains, and we're going to talk about their angles, profiles on the Stihl USG grinder. But what I'd like to do first, if you look up in the top left hand corner, is display the Stihl USG angles, and if you look to the right of that little picture, you'll see the Oregon angles. And if I talk about Stihl USG angles or I talk about Oregon angles, I'll try and be specific. But just to briefly recap on that, is that Oregon use 90 degrees on their vertical reference point when the grinding head is sitting straight up. And on the Stihl USG, they use 0. So if you tilt 30 degrees, you're tilting from 0 to 30. On an Oregon, you're tilting from 90 to 60. So get that out of the way. And I'll display another picture. I'll just put it here briefly. It actually shows up in the top left-hand corner, the far left side shows Oregon with the 90 degrees and 0 on the horizontal plane. And the Stihl, it shows 0 degrees reference point on the vertical and 90 degrees on the horizontal plane. So the total opposite. So same angle, different reference point. But the top plate uses the same reference point on both grinders. Now, the first chain that I'm going to show will be a full chisel, which looks like that. Working corner is very sharp. Top plate angle is normally 25 degrees, and normally on the Stihl USG, we come in at 40 degrees. So if you look in the top left-hand corner, you'll see the Stihl RS, Rapid Super, that is full chisel. It has as I mentioned, the actual head angle is 40 degrees and it's 25 degrees on the top plate here. Quite aggressive. So it's the full chisel. It's not the most aggressive, but it's much more aggressive than semi-chisel. So the next chain that I'm going to display is the semi-chisel, and that has an abbreviation of RM, Rapid Micro. The 40-degree angle is exactly the same, and we run 30 degrees on here. The semi-chisel is more durable because of the radius that's on the corner of the tooth, and if we actually zoom in there, you may be able to see that better. That nice radius on that working corner. So it tends to last a little bit longer between sharpenings, whereas the full chisel requires a little bit more sharpening, but it cuts at a faster rate. Anywhere from 10 to 15% roughly. So that's your semi-chisel. Probably most people out there are using the semi-chisel as opposed to the full chisel. So you just got to keep the full chisel out of the dirt, because if you've got the full chisel in the dirt, you may run into problems. Now, for those people that may be thinking, can you change the angles? This head angle here, or this top plate cutting angle, as I said, it's 40 degrees for both full chisel and semi-chisel. Yes, you could go 35 degrees, even 30 degrees. So the preference is yours. It depends on whether you've got hardwood or softwood. But I tend to stick with what Stihl generally have their chain at, because they've been doing this for decades. So by you changing the angle to some other angle, you're not going to reinvent the wheel. So it's already been tried thousands and thousands of times, all different angles by other people. And the angles that I've just given you are the angles that work the best in most timbers. The third chain, if we look up in the top left-hand corner, is Stihl's RH, Rapid Hexa. This is 25 degrees on the top plate cutting angle. So you've got 25 degrees coming down. So that's a different angle. The angle that goes in and the angle that goes out, that spacing is 120 degrees. That's why it's called hexa. It's a hexagonal shape. The top plate angle is 25 degrees also. So we've got 25 degrees on the top plate cutting angle. So we angle the head at 25 degrees and we angle the top plate angle at 25 degrees. So 25 and 25, pretty straightforward. You can get a file for it. You can buy a hexa wheel for it. Or if you look on my channel, you will see videos where you can grind your own profile, whether it's an Oregon grinder. It doesn't matter. I do have videos on that. Hexa was developed for the forestry workers back in 2017. I think they released it, August 2017. No, sorry. August 2021. Yeah, it's only a few years old. Yeah, it's not that old at all. Now, the next chain, if we look up in the top left-hand corner, is Husqvarna's X-Cut C85. That was released in, see, I've got them confused. The Husqvarna released that, I think, in 2017. So it's only been out a few years also, not that long. And if you notice, it's got a very aggressive angle on the point of the tooth. It's 45 degrees, that top plate angle going in. And it's 30 degrees on the top plate angle here. So we've got 45 degrees on the top plate cutting angle and 30 degrees on here. Now, the other thing that's interesting, if you actually look on the box of the Husqvarna, and we've got it out here, if you look at the picture, you'll notice that it's a very aggressive point, but they tell you on the box to use a file, a 732 5.5 millimeter file. And the problem is, if you use a round file on that, you're going to damage that point, you're going to damage that angle. Totally unavoidable. How do you get around that? Well, quite simply, you need to dress a wheel. So what I've been noticing lately is there's a lot of companies out there that are producing full chisel, and they're all copying each other, and they're all putting their little points on there on the end of the chain. And I've got two boxes here. This is Hurricane chain, 100-foot rolls. And I've got 3/8 and 3/8 low profile. And if I show you the 3/8 standard chain, we'll just sort of grab that out. Just get the box out of the way. They have been going to this hexagonal shape as well. So this is quite common, but a lot of the companies out there these days are really going to this hexagonal type point on the end of the chain. Grab a bit of chain out. Hopefully we can actually see this. Okay. We'll just sit that on top like that. If it sits there, what I want to do is zoom right in there. I'm going to have to take the camera off. What I'm going to do is zoom in there and show you this type of shape. There it is there. Now that looks pretty much like the Husqvarna. Now you put a round file in that, you're going to destroy that shape. The only way that you can regrind that and maintain that shape is reprofile your grinding wheel. And that's what I was saying. I'm seeing a lot of companies do this. This is typically what a lot of them are doing. So it's up to you whether you give it a basic grind or whether you file it by hand. But personally, I'm finding that this type of profile with a little pointy tip on it roughly varies from 0.5 millimeter to about 1.5 millimeters in length. That straight profile that's, as you see on the tooth, it goes down on a straight angle, then it starts to curve. That is becoming very, very popular on a lot of chains. Can't do it with a file. You've got to do it with a grinding wheel You need to slightly profile it a little bit so that it puts that little point on there. That little straight point is achieved on the side of the wheel. So you need to reshape and redress. Basically, all as you do is that you don't have that large curve on the bottom. So between being flat and having the large curve, it's about somewhere halfway in between. Just a slight little radius on it. Yeah, and you will get the side of the wheel going into the top of the tooth, and you'll get that nice straight edge. And that'll cut right into the timber. That's what I'm seeing at the moment. That seems to be the trend. The other trend out there is titanium coating. That's another trend that's sort of happening. But definitely in the last, since 2017, I think it was with Husqvarna's X-Cut, everyone else starts to copy each other, and that's what I'm seeing at the moment. So I hope that information helps. It's just a little bit of a overview on the Stihl USG, mainly on those three chains. You've got your RS chain. So we'll just recap briefly. Full chisel chain runs 40 degrees on this downward angle on the grinding head, and it runs 25 degrees on the top plate angle here. Better off leaving it at that. Don't make your own angles up. Stick with the manufacturer. Their RM, which is Rapid Micro, which is their semi-chisel, still runs 40 degrees, but runs 30 degrees on here. Their Rapid Hexa runs 25 degrees on here and runs 25 degrees on here. Now, with all that said, and lastly, I guess I'll throw in the Husqvarna. Husqvarna is running 45 degrees, so that's really aggressive. 45 degrees there, and it's running 30 degrees on here. So that's virtually it in a nutshell. Hopefully this information is good. I would stick with the manufacturer's recommendation. They've been doing it for decades, so I don't think you can go wrong with that recommendation, whatever the manufacturers recommend. Sure, you can change 5 degrees here or 5 degrees there. Depends whether you've got hard or soft wood. So if you're typically cutting hardwood on a continuous basis, normally you back off 5 degrees. And if you've got softwood, you can go another 5 degrees. A lot of people, if you've got really softwood, you can go up to 35 degrees on here. So yeah, that's what a lot of people do. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.